Shall Got it. Okay, great. I think it's time to do introductions because I don't see anyone else coming in right now. People may still show up, Matt, and if they do,
Did
perhaps
Esther Walker or Natalia Barber join us yet?
not that I've seen. Brian is here.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 7 participants right now, and I have the screen open to see if anyone else comes in.
Okay.
Shall we go around? I can prompt introductions. Maybe Rick, you go first because you work for the behind this.
Sure. No problem, Matt. Thanks for joining us tonight. Rick Holt. I'm out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
You're really
but I'm
faint,
on the
Rick.
road. Okay, can you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so good evening, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Rick Holt out of Cincinnati, Ohio, typically, and I'm on my way to Virginia right now. So I'm on the road. I appreciate you talking to us about intergenerational topics, especially since I'm very interested in intergenerational mobility.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm gonna leave Sam to last just because Matt, and you might want to do something to round up about the group. KJ, and say where you are.
Yeah, hi, I'm KJ Garner. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I started a nonprofit called Bike Fun. We teach people how to ride and how to ride better and create joyful riders. Found this group through Brian about a year ago, maybe not even, and have been really interested in trying to use the strategies that we've talked about to inform my own teaching.
Right. Seeing as Brian was mentioned, thanks, KJ. How about Brian? Where are you? Always interesting. Brian, can you hear us? Okay. Oh, Brian? Okay, we're going to pass over Brian until we hear from him. Ellen, how about you go next?
Hi, Matt. It's great to have you here tonight. I'm Ellen Rogers. I'm actually an associate dean at George Mason University in Northern Virginia, in our College of Education and Human Development. I am a Penn Stater, a proud recipient of my doctorate up there, where I was affiliated both, or not just both, in recreation and parks, as well as in business, in information systems, also over in social psychology and in community systems planning and design, which isn't even there now. But my research has really spanned the lifespan and deals with recreation, motivation, the nature of experiences and what sort of leads to them and what people get out of them. And so this was an amazing group to join. In fact, joining with an interest in recreation and physical activity, educational psychology. So I've got the education piece and the recreation piece, as well as having been a community planner for many years. And so to me, this kind of rounds it all out, what we're doing in the areas of active transportation and childhood mobility. So that's me.
Yeah, thank you,
You're
Ellen.
like 4 people.
Now I'm going to try Brian again. Brian, can you hear us? Brian? Okay. No Brian right now. Let's see. I can unmute him. No? Okay. Okay. Hopefully Brian can hear us. I'll go next. I'm Fionnuala Quinn. I have a small business called Discover Traffic Gardens. I set it up. It came out of my background as an engineer in bike and pedestrian design. And I realized there was a piece that I was interested in that hadn't really had any focus on it, which is these small scale towns that are scattered all over the US for children, usually for children, to learn walking, biking skills and to have fun. So I sort of entered into that space to try and provide support for the design and construction of the installations. So I've produced a bunch of good design guidance, and I just do those kind of projects. But it led me, of course, much further, because you can't design a thing without also thinking about all the other sides of how it's being used and the people using it. So, and there's just a lot that's needs to be explored in that area, and that a lot that I'm learning and that we're still learning. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm in Northern Virginia, I meant to say. So that's that. Sam, do you want to round out and even talk about our little group? I'm not sure we've talked about who we are collectively.
Right. So you know, Matt, I'm in Pennsylvania and I work on active transportation in general, but you know, with municipalities doing planning and helping communities become more safer, more accessible, and inviting for walking, biking, and using wheelchairs to get to everyday destinations. But I also do just sort of outreach and education, and including activities and you know, teaching people about riding and about what active transportation is and how it's potentially relevant for them, even if they don't think it is. So I was very happy to find this group. I also found it probably about 2 years ago. It had been formed previously by Fanula and Brian and Rick, looking at traffic gardens and just the importance of focusing on the 0 to 8 age group. The reality, though, is that the 0 to 8 age group, so there's very little focus on cycling and cycling education, and that group is actually going down in their riding, even though overall riding has risen in recent years. The rise in adults riding has masked the drop in kids riding. So we see this as a gap and sort of a needed area, but the kids don't do this completely independently. And so it really does engage people of different ages and different parts of the community. The kids can't make the infrastructure and, you know, they can help, they can work with Fanula on making traffic gardens and learning about design, but they don't get the grants, they don't, you know, make the laws. So, and they have caregivers that also need to learn about these things. So we're working with people at different ages and in different ways in relation to active transportation. And Brian, he's on but not on, he's very possibly somewhere he just can't talk. So he actually, you know, he actually sells balance bikes and trains people on balance bikes, and he lives in Hawaii. So he's sort of coming from that angle, and he's also, like me, his background is in design. So we sort of have that component, the architecture side. Got planning, I do architecture and planning. Ellen has that background, Fanula the engineering, and now Maylin has joined us. So Maylin, we're just doing some introductions.
So you're up.
Will I
Mary.
introduce myself? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Because we have our speaker, Matt Kaplan, here.
Great. Hi, everybody. Hi, Matt. My name is May Lynn. I live in California and work for Stanford Healthcare. We are a level 1 trauma hospital. We have both an adult and a pediatric hospital. And my goal at Stanford Healthcare is to educate so that we can reduce the risk for falling, and for bicycle safety, and for motor vehicle crashes. I meant to say injury prevention, sorry. Depends on the population I'm speaking to, sorry. And so we work on education mostly. And so my expertise is the bicycle safety portion of it. And so with the group, we teach learn to ride, as well as getting those on the road to riding safely. So really my goal is to encourage and to educate and to engage out in the community. So I work with pretty much anyone and everyone that I could work on with, so that we can keep our folks safe on the street. And I'm very blessed to be a part of this group, and that we can continue to get people joining us. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Brian will be with us very shortly. I got a little note from him, so we'll see him soon. So great. I think that's everybody. Matt, do you want to jump in with a presentation?
Okay.
Fanula, real
Wow,
quick,
you're pretty
I was hoping-
eclectic group. Oh,
Rick?
what's that, Rick?
Just a note, we have 3 other people who were indicating they might join us tonight, so Fanula will be on the lookout for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're a very eclectic group. Raise your hand if you feel like you really know the intergenerational studies field of research and practice. Raise your hand if you want to know more about the field. Okay, good. All right. So so I probably have about an 18 or 20 minute kind of overview of that field. I could do that, and then we could step back and see the intersections with all the ways in which your interests intersect in your intergenerational cycling group. Or we could just talk. I think it might be useful to show some slides, and we'll tape record it. It's being recorded, so we could catch it later. Is that okay? I think I could share.
Great. Great. Are you able to?
I think so. And while I'm trying to do that, just my own background. So I'm kind of like an intergenerational specialist generalist. So I pretty much do almost everything intergenerationally in terms of looking at different problems, working in different sectors, trying to deal with different aspects of helping people be healthier, strengthening families, improving communities, community livability, and so forth. So at any rate, it's pretty broad, but it does fit together into an umbrella. So I'll spend a few moments. My background's in environmental psychology from City University of New York Grad Center. So, I mean, originally from that training, we look at environment behavior relations, but from an intergenerational studies perspective, before the behavior, we look at the relationships. It's all about relationships. So relationships across generations and how that influences how people see themselves, how they behave, and so forth, and in the context of the physical environment, considering the social, political, cultural, economic context of the environment. So I'm gonna, yeah, does everybody follow that one? That was a long sentence. Okay. All right, and Ellen will translate if I go too far, because yeah, she swims in a lot of the psychology stuff. Okay, I think I can share my screen pretty readily here.
Right.
All right, I believe you can see it here.
Yes.
Okay, so I needed to come up with a title. So I threw in 2 things. One is intergenerational adventures, in other words, ways in which people engage, but really with an emphasis on settings, intergenerational settings, because of, I mean, you're creating community spaces for people to come together and do healthy things, including cycling and other related activities. So I try to encompass all that. So let me just, I may go kind of quick. Feel free to stop me, ask questions, debate anything if you'd like to. I'm from New York, and we don't feel happy unless there's a good argument. At least in my family, that's how it was. So yeah, feel free to dive in. So first, I want to just be really clear on the word intergenerational, as far as how people like myself kind of use it. And to do so, I just want to distinguish it between mono and multi-generational. So to do it very quickly, we look at a park setting. So this park, we'd probably call it like a monogenerational park. It's designed with adults in mind. There's not really any movable parts. it's hard to allow your curiosity to express itself, to dig into things, and so forth. And it's really passive, the kind of behavior that's out there. So, I mean, of course, children and youth will find ways to have fun and to explore this. They may climb on the statue, which is kind of like the Nittany Lion for those of you who know Penn State, but that was just a coincidence. Okay, then we have a multi-generational setting. So here's the park designed intentionally for people with different levels of ability, different interests, cross generations, and so forth. So you see people doing things which tend to be more generation specific, like the sandbox, diving into that and jumping on the exercise bars and so forth. Grandparents, parents kind of more watching it. So it's certainly, we could say it's universal design. It's welcoming for all generations and so forth. It's a park that works. There's a lot to do. So now it's potentially intergenerational, but let's look at what an intentional intergenerational paradigm or perspective would do to this. All right, so for each of these micro behavior settings, it's designed so people can get into it and do it together across generations. So on the bottom right, we look at a sandbox. So it has a bar to help people who have less mobility than younger people diving into the sandbox, so they could sit there and engage and be a part of it. People doing gardening and so forth, music, checkers, enjoying different kinds of activities together. And of course, we have cycling there as well. So are you getting a feeling of that distinction? So it's intentionally designed to create engagement. And really, there are unlimited possibilities. When we talk about intergenerational engagement, it could be around community planning. The upper shot on the left is from my dissertation, actually, looking at intergenerational approaches to community visioning and planning. So there's a land use mapping exercise. This multi-age group, they're looking at the community based on what's there and where they live and what's missing. I'll talk about Hawaii. Bottom left is a walkabout, talkabout activity. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But I spent 9 years in Hawaii, by the way, before I came to Penn State in the year 2000. And I have a call with the Hawaii Intergenerational Network after this. So so Brian, I could chat with Brian more about Hawaii down the road. But at any rate, it's how people find out about each other, what they do for fun, where they live. So, the Dutch have a saying, unknown is unloved. So a lot of these programs bring things that people have in common or they're curious. It helps them share the way they are. The upper middle is a family karate club in State College, karate dojo. And this is a grandparent and his grandson. People might say, oh, how do you feel about exercising? How's it good for your health? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just doing things with my grandson. So it's the incentive to be with family, to connect, and the activity of doing this art form is more conducive to family, as it's been in Okinawa, passed down. So it's family and health together. So they encourage each other. Okay. So basically, these kinds of activities, when we talk about between generations or intergenerational work, there are some ways of categorizing it, basing the whole continuum of programs based on who's serving whom, who's benefiting more. But generally, they're mutually beneficial. It's a lifespan approach to how people learn and become civically engaged and involved in community building activities. And there's really a component of strategic planning, collaboration across agencies, and systems that serve different age groups. So anyway, so that's what they have in common. Our program here at Penn State, we call it the Penn State Intergenerational Program. with these core concepts, we apply intergenerational strategies. And there's only like 6 here, but there are about a dozen these days in different contexts: environmental education, retirement communities, to help them become more part of the community and introduce different ways to engage beyond their own age group. Community planning and visioning, which is where my background began with this field. Even farm families, helping them deal with issues of estate planning, continuity planning, and so forth, early childhood development, lots of health and wellness type stuff, work with kinship families, grandparents and other relatives raising grandchildren. So at any rate, as I said before, it's pretty broad, but it's not all scattered. It all falls into like an intergenerational paradigm, looking at these, basically connecting concepts like productive aging or active aging. That's no matter what your age group is, as you folks know more than anyone else, I know, it's important to be active and doing things, exercising and so forth. Lifelong learning, it's not only, up to a certain age, we learn throughout our life. Civic engagement is something that isn't, when you do it intergenerationally, it adds new components, new ways to understand the relationship between past, present, and future. And interdependence is really key as well. When one generation is doing better, then all generations benefit. So let's just say if a community has some older adults who are kind of really stuck, very isolated, and they need some care, and they're, especially during COVID, it's really rough, really on all ages, but just talking about older adults here. When neighbors visit, it's good for everyone. It strengthens the relationships between people. That person who's really isolated has gifts and information and talents to share. At any rate, so that interdependence is a key thrust. So we've done all kinds of models, approaches, and methods to bring people together. We've done like an intergenerational friends fair. Most of these activities, we have videos for. We put it all on my website. It's all for free. I sort of swim under the radar, so nobody's giving me a hard time about giving it away, which is good. I appreciate that. And people appreciate looking at different models and strategies and curricula. So there's always a research component in all those prongs of the umbrella, and then an outreach education component. Okay. Just got a call from Beijing. Anybody joining from Beijing? Anyway, lots of phone calls come in all the time. Okay. So, also we do conferences. We finally did our first statewide conference. In July 2022, we're going to do another one in 2024. And it covers all these different conference tracks: health and wellness, education, lifelong learning, and so forth. It turned out really good. We were able to jumpstart Penn, Pennsylvania Intergenerational Network, so people can learn about different evidence-informed intergenerational models and not have to invent it from the beginning, and so forth. Looking at the settings, intergenerational settings, there are some other terms that float around. My colleagues and I wrote a book around the concept of contact zones, intergenerational contact zones. But really, it's like activity hubs. People talk about placemaking, which includes the process of modifying spaces and places for intergenerational engagement. All right, and the special thing about all this, after this slide, I start with the pictures. So to keep you engaged here. It's not the intergenerational that's the wow thing. It's the intergenerational connections are really the method by which certain things are accomplished. And I'm really focused on problems. Like, what value does an intergenerational angle or paradigm have for helping people become healthier in terms of their lifestyle behaviors, families that are in challenging situations to find connection and care and support. So these are just, I think your kind of work kind of checks a lot of these boxes. And I could give you a few examples around some of these. So there's really only one foundation around it that fund, like the Eisner Foundation, which really funds California and New York, that really focuses on intergenerational only. So people always ask, well, how do you fund this stuff? So it's really, you know, if there's a foundation trying to reduce social isolation in certain communities, like low economic development or high crime communities, an intergenerational approach to address those issues might be appealing to them. Okay, so it's really what it accomplishes. So the history of our field was largely with social science people, social workers, psychologists, and so forth, talking about the connection between people, look at what they're doing together, they're helping each other, mentoring, singing together. But it wasn't really looking at the environmental context. And then over the last, 20, 25 years or so, we started getting like landscape designers, architects, geographers, and so forth involved, who are really designing spaces for people to come together, parks and other and indoor spaces meant to be intergenerational hubs. So how do we get them to lean in and talk about creating good places for intergenerational engagement, but also paying attention to the activities and programs, as well as the policies that undergird what is allowed to or expected to happen in that setting. And then we got to also look at partnerships and process. So I call it the 5 Ps. I could visit almost any intergenerational shared site. Let's say it's a preschool within an retirement community, and look at these 5 Ps and be able to ascertain ways in which I can make some suggestions for them to animate some possibilities for connection. Also values, important for values. So values do matter. If you look at how space is designed, you look at this grandparent with a grandchild, and he's there for feeding time and so forth. I mean, these are really like dueling chairs. It's very hard to get intimate here. But this furniture designer guy, Chris Murray, who I met, maybe 2 decades ago, he had a solution for this. He designed this kind of furniture where the child's actually in the middle and comfortable and engaged. So there's not that artificial distance. And then I look at some sites, like a shared site, a retirement community, or a senior center, and a preschool in the same building. And the values question hasn't really been deeply addressed. So here you have a very thick glass, keeping both parts, service areas, separate. And the seniors are enjoying the places, like advertised as a place to enjoy being with kids or watching kids. And most people I know who are into intergenerational work, say it feels like a zoo. The kids are curious. I mean, they're all curious about each other, and yet there's no chance for engagement. So that's generally, we're trying to squeeze more engagement opportunity out. So when we look at ways to engage, we look at dance, we look at toys. Toys now and then are great. Ways to exercise, ways to make music. The bottom right is the Penn State Kazoo Club. Believe it or not, we have one of those. And that's certainly a multi-generational group, and they play together, so which becomes intergenerational. So certainly what you do, all bike activities and so forth, creating bikes that family members can ride together and ride next to each other and go places together. It's such an important, framework for promoting healthy living across the lifespan. So, but anyway, I want to just give a few more examples of where what other kinds of ways to spark intergenerational connection. some objects are kind of crazy, just really exciting. So I don't know if you all have seen a lot of castles, but or have castles in your communities. But I met this architect who repurposes castles on the right side next in Galway, Ireland. This is a castle that him and his team were working on. So part of repurposing it is also to come up with like Renaissance fair kinds of stuff, ways to get people to go there and learn about the history and so forth. And this is like an old-fashioned restraining device. It's like a public shaming thing. People throw tomatoes at you, and you might say, "What the heck is Kaplan talking about?" They're not looking. They're not engaging. But yet, they're both having a ton of fun together and being silly together. And now they have a story to tell together for a family meal or something. So how do you figure that out? How do you, part of it is process. You see what people are interested in. They might now be, after this experience, be more willing to find out about some of the historical problems about how people were treated. Toys and games. This is my colleague Alan Lai in Hong Kong. This English Language Center. He's a linguist by training. And the big deal there is to get people to speak naturally in English if they're trying to learn it. Unfortunately, a lot of places teach English by the test, and students really sweat because they're really high, high profile and significant tests. So here, they're just having free-flowing conversation. The senior's part of the milieu. And they're talking about things like, what are you interested in? What did you do as a kid? He says, oh, yeah, we played finger soccer, or they called it football. And they said, really, what was that like? He's describing it, and he says, would you like to build one? So they built one together. Meanwhile, they're speaking in English, and it's really helping, again, as I said before, literacy development. Family nature clubs. What do people have in common? A lot of times we're talking about like senior environment clubs and children's environmental education programs, but families have a need to be together, spend time together, and they learn values about nature. So how do you create a setting where they can not only learn about nature, but actually contribute to its preservation? So the family nature clubs model, Chiara D'Amore and some other folks, through the Children in Nature Network, they have some cool models for that. So they have a passion for the environment, like the people you work with have a passion for biking. All right, so walking, walk about, talk about. Again, you can't really care of somebody if you don't really know who they are, what they're doing, what are their gifts and assets. So a lot of times there's certainly ageism, in the media and so forth. Here you have a senior in Hawaii doing a tour of her senior center for these children who walk right by it every day and just see it as just an impediment to the shortcut that they wish they had. So they take turns showing each other, and they walk around the community and find out what each other likes to do, what they're afraid of, what doesn't work well. So here are some examples of distinctive spaces, which beg for people to do things together. They're calling. In Taiwan, there's this senior club around 100-year-old trees. They care about them. They talk about the history of them, the ghost stories. And student groups started getting these special tours. And they started joining the club as they started realizing how cool it was that there were like these ghost stories and all this history and ways to care for the trees. They were so significant. So at any rate, that it not only evokes personal memories about the history, but it's also going forward. How do we want to live? What kind of community do we want? How do we design this space so we could even muster around here and talk about the tree, care for the tree? Just like you're talking about bike gardens. I mean, we have to pay attention to place, not just the activity itself. So that's the 5 Ps. All right, I'm going to skip that. Have a bunch of references if anybody's interested in seeing those. I think I kept it to 20 minutes. Did I undo it? Oh,
That was great.
okay. Sorry, there's a lot, but I just wanted to give you like the breadth of it all, and I'm happy to zero in on the work you're doing, and maybe help you squeeze a little bit more intergenerational water out of the towel, or more water out of the intergenerational towel, however you look at it, because there's always more engagement that could happen. A lot of people, it's amazing. You could be training somebody in this field and then they get a chance to sing, let's say a 75-year-old to sing in front of a group of kids. And the kids are sitting there, they sing their song, and then the teacher says, thank you very much. We'll see you next year on Grandparents' Day, without asking the kids about their song. Or does anybody have a dance to go with that song? So that's why we have process as one of the P's. It's really important when training people to do intergenerational work that they understand the importance of people co-learning and co-planning and co-designing and co-developing environments. Anyway, there are examples on all of your backgrounds. Who again was it? And I think Maylin, you're in Stanford doing healthcare.
Yes, correct.
Let me just give you one last example, and then I'll shut up and follow your lead. Our Hershey Medical Center, which is tied to Penn State, they had a wicked problem. Young adult survivors of cancer, after they're discharged, aren't so good, let's just say, in maintaining healthy eating and healthy lifestyle behaviors. So my colleague, Daniel George, who's a medical anthropologist in the medical humanities program that we have, he worked with master gardeners. They developed a whole gardening program. They garden together, they grow fruits and vegetables together, they learn together. And meanwhile, it becomes like the social ecology of that group, of that setting, tied with growing food, the physical activity, and seeing each other and talking about what they did to stay healthy and what they're learning. It's like milieu therapy. It's one of the phrases I always like from environmental psych. So yeah, so there's that kind of thinking that I think is important, rather than just to give a prescription and send somebody home to their environment where they're not necessarily living healthily. Okay, so thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Your turn.
Who wants to
Oh,
jump?
there's chat. We got 4 chat ones.
Oh,
Okay.
well, just commentary.
Oh,
Yeah. Ellen, I immediately identified the zoo situation, and Fanula is very familiar with castles.
One of my brothers lives on a street called Castle View. That's because he can see a castle, and the other lives on Castle Close because it's next to a castle. So yes, I'm familiar with castle.
well,
And
we romanticize castles, but I was so amazed to see that a lot of people, like in that one area in Galway, I mean, they looked at it as a terrible thing. There's glass on the floor, teenagers are there, they drink, they throw the bottles and stuff, and it was striking.
No, I lived on a street with a castle. We passed it all the time. I never went into it. It was because, the thing with castles is they last. So they're all there. They're really just big old homes. So yeah. And one of the things I've actually commented that because my family obviously live in Ireland and I don't, is because they're so not valued, the view of them isn't valued. So the castle that I grew up passing all my life, it's just on my parents' street, you now can barely see because they've let things be built all around it. Like I'm like in the US, you'd see it. So it certainly never got used for anything. I don't think it ever dawned on us. It could be an asset, but yeah, they're all over. They're rarely used.
About castles, so my latest project focus is on rural depopulation,
Mhm.
which is a wicked problem around the world, many areas. So we part of the angle is to get the voices of young people and older, all generations, across the age continuum, to focus in on what can we do to leverage the assets in our community. So one of the areas we looked at, I was in Spain on sabbatical just now, in Granada. We went to some villages, and there were two different places with castles. One had an abandoned building next to it. People didn't care about it. And then the other had programs where people dressed up. They had fairs. They did all kinds of stuff. Like just biking now and then. I mean, there's so much respect for history and coming together. And so at any rate, it's leveraging cultural and other resources, historical resources, is a key theme, I think, for community change.
Mhm. Yes.
So I do have when I mentioned that, there are things that we do that involve many ages. I am curious about, because you mentioned teaching, but I would say standard teaching is not necessarily what you're talking about. So I'm curious how you would describe a more dynamic and intergenerational version of teaching.
Did I use the word teaching?
You
I
did
think
at one point.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Right, I should have said outreach education.
Okay.
Right, so teaching is not tying people's hands together and having them listen. So we learn together by creating, by researching, measuring water quality together and so forth. There was a project, I think I could distinguish it pretty well, between an intergenerational framework, participatory learning and action, versus a passive, deadly experience where you have to listen to the teacher. It was in Hawaii as well, on Oahu. A preschool shares space with an adult daycare program where people have like mild, pretty much cognitive deficits. They share a courtyard. So I was at Hawaii Pacific University then, in the psych faculty, working with students, college students, to plan intergenerational programs. So somebody had someone come with a trained dog, a companion dog. And there was the person showing the dog was lecturing about the dog. And everybody was just sitting in like a classroom environment, a classroom setting, falling asleep, not having much fun. Then the presenter had a phone call, had to step away for a minute. And then one of the seniors because at Hawaii, everything's open, picked up a step right from outside and waved it in front of the dog. And then the dog started getting really excited and threw it across the courtyard. The dog ran and everybody got up. The kids are jumping up and down. They're taking turns throwing the stick. And it became like a bonding activity. They learned more about the dog being cool and responsive to human energy than they would have listening forever to this person lecture. So in all these cases, it's really important. If it's a garden, to figure out what to design. If it's something on wheels, to talk about how can we do it together. I've seen in retirement communities that have preschool kids. So if there's nobody from risk management watching, I've seen little kids get on top of the back of these motorized wheelchairs and play and roll together, and they're loving it. It's like, it's electric. But yet, and that's how they would learn that this guy with this electric wheelchair is kind of cool and likes to have fun, as opposed to that's the guy who can't walk. So he probably doesn't hear so well. He's probably not much fun to talk with. So it's the experience of learning about the breadth of experience of other people. So anyway, that's why I don't love the word teaching so much.
Okay. I mean, so we do activities that are like the playground, right? The kids have lots of fun and potential engagement. And I currently bring in older people who can be learning about how to work with kids, I try to also get them onto the balance bikes. Like I have both grown-up size balance bikes, so they also get to do it. But it's still, you know, we're sort of providing the environment, and then the kids do the thing. There's a little bit of like the grown-ups or other people, could be families or whatever, might be walking through a layout, so they're on the crosswalk. And so people are interacting. When they get to the crosswalk, the kids are like, they're supposed to yield, theoretically. They're learning about things like that. But I need to think about this, like what that would look like. And whether, because right now I'm literally imparting a lot of information to people who don't know anything about, like the grown-ups, who don't know anything about balance bikes, and teaching kids or engaging with kids on balance bikes. Because mostly our point is you aren't teaching, you just have to set up the situation. Has to be safe, has to meet a certain few basic criteria. You have to have the right geometry on the bike. You can't be setting the kids up to careen down a hill, and you have to give them time and encouragement. But it's not like deadly teaching like you're describing, but
Well,
it's also not as engaged as it might be.
right. So there are a few ideas right off the top of the bat. So even before they start, well, certainly everything you're teaching them is important, right? I mean, that's not to go away, and even meet them separately and give them the information they need. But how do things on wheels work? I've seen like activities where they would build like a little 3-wheel, have wood and different materials in a park with long tracks, like with chalk marked tracks. And with intergenerational teams, they kind of put it together in certain ways, and then they're allowed to push it, see which one goes the furthest, going straight. And they're laughing and talking and so forth. And then something's going to go the furthest. And then they want to look at it. Well, what was it? Why did it go the furthest? So it's almost not to play dumb, but just to not have all the answers and have them discover it together. And and if they're really into it, it can become like a tradition or part of a festival. And that space there's a mural wall or something like that. And by luck, they may have someone like you or some people from your group who really know how to create a setting with a mural and model building, so forth, to make it really come alive. So there's that interactive element with loose parts. Some settings don't have loose parts. They're designed so strong that as people outgrow up, they have different interests. Like reading programs with young children, it's the adult reading, but at some point the kids want to read, and at some point they want to do theater and performances and talk about issues in the community. So how do you create a space to allow that kind of growth? So it's really alive. It's a fun field. Yeah, it's not really a field. It's like what is it? Okay, sorry.
More like an ethos. It's an approach.
A way of, actually, now I call it, yeah, right. So thanks. I'm glad I asked that. A way of life. That's sort of like what we're starting to do. We just had a Generations United conference. The level of work, you have scholars connecting with practitioners, connecting with students, doing not quite controlled, but really informed field work in different contexts. It's just really going leaps and bounds. It's like more developed. It was the first Generations United conference that sold out in DC just in July. So it's happening. It's like a way of life. People are kind of leaning in. It's not necessary. I used to have to beg people to let me do something in their school. Now I could barely cross the street. Everybody wants some help, but I love it. So it's good. I find purpose in life. I could tell Ellen has a question. She's leaning in and she's like mouthing her lip a little bit.
No, I was going to say Fanola looked like she had something to say. I was thinking about things, and it struck me, and Fanola and Rick, this will resonate, is when we were designing the traffic garden in DC and actually laying on the ground what the the children had done through sharing their voices about what they wanted this to look like. And then the parents and the grandparents and the others that came in and engaged in helping prepare the materials. But I think one of the more dramatic comments were from the grandparents that were scouting out, hoping that it would get finished faster, and shared about having the opportunity to talk with the kids and talk together about what biking was like and what the traffic was like and where they could go and what they could do. And so it really kind of brought those pieces together in those environments that really did become part of it intentional, but part of it I'd like to think kind of creeped over into the community once we were done.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah, but sometimes mentoring programs turn into one-way learning. So we always try to have everyone ask, like, reciprocity again, learning from and with one another. So a young teenager has a lot of knowledge about the community, what's safe, what's not, who to look out for. It's not only the ones who had all this history. So a good facilitator really gets that going. And then you talk about, well, what is it that we lost, or that used to be here, that's missing, that should be there? So I've done intergenerational model building, community visioning, murals, and so forth. So anyway.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. And they're all over the place, because I come from a different country where it's different, the structure is different. So then I see the US a certain way, and it's much more disjointed. And, because families are not close to each other, everybody, people are very far apart from each other. And then because everything is zoned into, you all live here and you all live here, and people who are old live out here, sort of thing. So the actual land use and zoning has made it hard. And then because everyone lives far away, it's not happening naturally, the way it can and does elsewhere. But I'm going to throw something out because you've reminded, and I always feel like I have great power because I set up, people come to me for a project, like a traffic garden, but they're just thinking the traffic garden, but I'm thinking all these other bits. And like, I have a meeting next week, like right away I'm right away, I'm going to be putting some of this in because I can suggest and influence how the thing will be set up. But I want to talk about something slightly different, because my daughter lives in remote Alaska, in an indigenous area, which is really, really different. And she talks about this a lot, because elders are such a part of the community and are so highly respected. And she went out to do a story. She's a reporter. So she went out to a remote community to do a story about a school. And when she got to the school, she was told there was a muralist in the school doing something. So she thought, well, she'd do a story about the muralist. And the muralist was engaged, and they were asked to put up, they were told they were to put up elders on a mural of the elders in the school. So that's fine. It's a regular public elementary school. And then it turned out it was supposed to be a mural of every elder in the community, and all the elders that people remembered also. So the whole school is now portraits of elders in the elementary school, and kids all go around going, that's my this, that's my that, and talk about people. And it's just like, it was like, it's only paint. Like, it was such an incredible thing that they did in this school, and it looks fabulous, but it just really hit me. It's like, oh yeah, because they really think differently about their elders and connecting them in and all this sort of stuff. She has lots of stories, but elders are just so important in the communities that she spends time in now doing stories. So anyway, so just that's a part of America, or North America, that's actually different to what I started out about the zoning and everybody being separated. So you still have this intergenerational way of life in some places.
Well, I
So-
love it. And we could do that. I mean, that kind of process,
Sure.
place
Yeah.
identity, trying to use the arts and other modalities to get people to talk about what they honor, what's special about the community. So not every community in school looks alike. So I think, and if it could be tying to the curriculum, then you get the support of the principal, the teachers, so it's not extra on top of their jobs. You know, if they want to do a survey to find out what everybody wants to do the mural on, you're talking about interviewing skills and learning research skills. So that, as I said before, it's about what are the objectives of the setting. We have to pay attention. So that's education. And the example with the Hershey Medical Center's garden, that was more focused on health and well-being, but there was a social connection as well. I love that. And there's a cultural thread in what your example.
Yeah.
That was great. You should write that up.
Well, she's written stories about it, so
I'll put it on my website. I mean,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
give credit.
Yeah, she's public radio, so and it was one of the most popular
wow.
stories she wrote. So anyway, and it was kind of a side story. I see Brian has joined us from Hawaii. So Brian, do you want to say hello and can you hear us? Should be Brian. Okay, it looks like his microphone's on. Okay, well, hopefully Brian will jump in at some point. So anyway.
I also wanted to ask while we're waiting for Brian. So I live in a small town in central PA. I've spent the last several years involved in a big park project, and we got over $1 million to redo a park. I wrote all the grants for combination of flood mitigation, public safety, beautification, all ages, recreation, and nature play. That was for just one phase. They're doing another $1 million phase now. That first phase, so it had this nature play and playground. So it has a conventional playground, has nature play, has a creek going through it, which did floodplain restoration. We had trail extension. The trail was supposed to go through the park, like through the playgrounds and then across the creek. We have some stepping stones, but we did not get the low water crossing that we were trying for. PennDOT would not play on that. And now we have people talking about how they want to ban people who are not at the playground with a child from being there. And it is making me crazy. Even like people I think of as sort of well-meaning and thoughtful adults are like, yeah, we should make a rule that you can't be there. So this playground it's got a railroad on one side, a creek on the end, creek on two sides, and a road on the other side. So it has historically been sort of a dead end. The fact that it does now even have the stepping stones means that you can sort of get through across the creek. So it's a little bit less of a cul-de-sac, and people are pushing back on that. Like, honestly, we wrote it into all the grants, right? All ages, recreational space. They're definitely, it's still in progress, like the bocce courts don't exist yet and stuff like that. But there's definitely, like, I even want to go hang out in the nature play space. We would have died to have that, when my kids were little. They're now like 18 and 21. So I want to spend time in that. And do I have to, I have friends who have little kids, but can I only go when they're there? So just thoughts on that, like making the case for people who have this sort of panic.
Yeah, it's well, participation, like democracy, is messy. But yeah, it's worthwhile. It's like my dissertation project in a school I had seen in Long Island City, Queens. There was this one older guy. He's a self-proclaimed Trotskyite. Not that I know what that means, but he was really into like hardcore participation. At any rate, there was some conflict between the children and the seniors about what they liked and what they wanted to do. And he says, calm down, don't worry, it'll work out. He says, this is beautiful stuff. It's like an orchestra practicing. It sounds terrible, but yet when it comes time to perform, people come together. I mean, I can understand the people who are very afraid of losing control of the outcome. They want to be very rigid in what can happen, and that has an upside. You could predict what's going to happen, and it has a downside. Like the all ages park in Flushing Meadows, $6 million. This is like 30 years ago. $6 million park design. Everything was for all. I mean, it's all abilities. Like you could do a swing with your hands, but you know, one day before it was fully open, a group of teenagers took sledgehammers and created like hundreds of $1,000s worth of damage. And why are they so angry? Where were they coming from? Were they involved? Did they know what was going to happen? You know, did anybody engage them? That's street work, you know, and it's hard work. You know, it's not paid a lot, but I think it's important. One way or another, people are going to get their voice in. So
Right.
I like that anarchy. I mean, I like to work with it. And when you ask people, tell them the alternative, you know, which is like you're going to be stuck with when it rains here. It's going to be like whatever, you'll be walking knee deep, and or your houses aren't going to be worth anything because nobody's going to come here, and there's no beautiful you know, resources. I mean, there's a way to be a little bit manipulative in a nice, proactive kind of way to
Right.
get people to lean in and calm down.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges is we actually did massive public outreach, and the original grants came out of many public meetings. Public meetings where childcare was provided, you know, where we were engaging kids. We had kids asking kids. We had kids drawing pictures of tree houses and swings, and you know, like this is what we want. In fact, that was actually a big sticking point. They had taken all the swings out. The swings are back. Thank you very much. But at the same time, there's these other, you know, struggles. So it was the public that wanted all ages, right? They wanted all ages recreation, and yet now there's this pushback. And so I think this is a good discussion just to remember, but I also appreciate that I'm taking it away from the biking. While there are bikes going through this space, and it's one of the few, you know, safe spaces in the town where little kids can ride their balance bikes because there's wide trail and stuff like that. And grown-ups ride their bikes through. It's still, you know, we should talk more about early childhood cycling education in an intergenerational context.
I see some of the questions here are kind of interesting. Not about biking though, but I'm okay. Should we try to go through these? Ellen, you mentioned the Zoom world. How are these engagements on Zoom? It's tricky. It's tricky. There are ways. We had early in the pandemic, before the intergenerational people got over their depression from being like creamed, you know, like destroyed, because so much of it is engagement in real time and real place. So we looked at ways in which technology is used to connect. Like there are ways for people to get on Zoom and together go on and we have this recording. I think it was decent. People after me started really getting much better at answering these questions about tech, but you know, like ways to go to the museum in the Louvre, you know, together, you know, via Zoom, and you're interacting and learning together, you know, and so forth. And you can't do that even in place without a plane and, you know, traveling. So there are ways to use Zoom and so forth. And I think a lot of the intergenerational people eventually had a pivot when they started locking down the senior centers. That was really brutal. What people kept asking me was, we don't want high tech. I was amazed. I learned so much. They were nice to me, but they could have smashed me and said, look, you're emphasizing high tech. So you got to get, so the seniors who aren't really loving it or, you know, going to it, you need hardware, software, and training. And it's really rough. So then I started listening more at low-tech things, sort of like a walkie-talkie, and playing tic-tac-toe with tape on both sides of the glass wall. So visitors who cannot get into the senior center can at least talk to each other and play games together. So there are ways to adjust, and I think there's a lot written about this these days. It's being published all over the place and so forth. So we have references and resources.
Sorry for not being on screen earlier. I was at UH Manoa this morning. They told me to come pick up some bikes that they closed a couple classrooms, but I was actually confronted with 17 bikes that needed servicing. So I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem at all.
For being late. You guys have all said wonderful things. Sam gave a little introduction, I heard when I was finishing up there. Thank you. And I mean, studying architecture, we've been talking about this for so many years. I mean, I graduated 30 years ago. And it just still raises questions. There have been a lot of changes, but it really, I really think it comes down to champions, and Sam has done a wonderful job with what she's been doing. And just listening to you talk, Sam, today about explaining it, I don't know if you can see the development that you've had over the last 9 months from what you initially thought it was going to be, and now the way you speak is like me speaking. So it's been really wonderful, and it really comes from actually doing it over and over. And I was just talking to a pediatric therapist, and she made the comment, yeah, I just briefly crossed paths. I said, we can't get into it now, but we need to have a conversation. And she said, yeah, I work with kids, and then I recommend, bikes and bikes with training wheels. And I was like, oh, we really need to talk. But I interestingly just ran into her at the airport. We were at a show together in Tokyo for my other business. And I said, oh, you stayed after the show for a few days for meetings? She said, oh, no, I went on a bike trip with my friends, came out and met me. We went 2 hours north of Tokyo and did a cycling trip. And so I'm like, yeah, we really need to talk, because, here's someone who's in cycling and she's recommending bikes with training wheels for kids. So the whole this group is really focused on the 0 to 8. And that because there was this gap at the national level that no one was talking about it. And you had mentioned, Mr. Kaplan, about we're all passionate about bikes. I don't see myself as a bike passionate person. I use a bike to ride around town, to go shopping, to ride my kids to school, but I don't cycle on the road. And so our discussion last week was, cyclists are viewed as like we're wearing people. But I just came from a beach town near Tokyo called Chigasaki, and I saw everybody on beach cruisers with surfboards hooked onto the side of it, because no one lives right next to the beach. Here where I live, everybody carries their board over to the beach, or they drive to the beach. But over there, everyone's riding around with bikes. And so they're not really like bike passionate people. They're just using bikes to get around. And I think, part of what we do is to frame, like, we're not talking about early childhood bike education. We're talking about early childhood brain development. And one of the tools we use is balance bikes and traffic gardens. And, part of this discussion group for almost 3 years has been like, what are the real digging questions that we need to ask? What are the ways that we need to approach this? I'm learning so much just by having these different dialogues. And so I think kind of listening to this discussion today was, we need to reframe what we're talking. Don't even mention the word bike, because as soon as you mention bike, so many people get turned off. But if you talk about, hey, we're going to give these kids a leg up on life, and we found a way to stimulate brain development and the inner ear, I'm losing the word. What is the word, you guys?
I know.
Vestibular and proprioception.
Vestibular development. And so if you start
So,
talking about, you know, some other kind of thing, but you don't even mention the word bike, I think that it's kind of, my wife's a high school math teacher, and as soon as you say math, so many people just turn off. They're like, oh, I'm not a math person. And, you know, that's a big national conversation right now. But anyway, I don't know, I really appreciate your coming on and talking about this development. In my video, Biking Education for Children 0 to 8, the first image is a grandma with her like barely 2-year-old granddaughter on the balance bike, and it's the cutest thing. And what I've found is, like, over my shoulder, the event here is open to the public, so seniors are typically on a fixed income, and so they're looking for somewhere to bring their grandchildren. And so when I do these public events, whether it's at Honolulu Museum of Art on Family Sunday, where it's free to get in, it's 11 to 3, or this Children and Youth Day, the first Sunday in October, like so often it's the grandparents bringing the kids, whatever the age there are. And it's because it's in a free event, and then they're engaging with the kids. So those are just a couple things.
sounds good. So what I was thinking before I met you all today, I mean, the ideal challenge, I mean, I was just thinking the family, they're all biking and they want to do more biking together, but let's say there's no bike paths, you know, or not sufficient safety. And then beyond that, but where can they bike to? Like other intergenerational contact zones, like outdoor, you know, like a water garden, spraying water, or, you know, things like that. So it becomes a broader question. So how can the environmental context kind of enable people to be on bikes and have fun and do things together? Meanwhile, they're exercising because they're going someplace. Anyway.
And the great example, who is not jamming in because his audio line's not so great, is Rick. And he managed to get himself into the newspapers last week, newspapers and TV maybe, because in his community there was a school bus strike. So obviously no buses, all the kids had to go to school. And there was Rick with his cargo bike and his 6-year-old granddaughter on the back, biking her back and forth to school during the strike. And what was, of course, amazing was, of course, they were the only people doing this. And meanwhile, around the schools, there was chaos because there was massive lines, because everybody got into their cars to take their kids to school. So he did end up in the media for that. And of course, if it was Japan or somewhere, or, you know, like, it'd be like, well, it would be ordinary. It's not ordinary, but it really was, you know, great picture that, you know, his granddaughter loving it. Like, that's the thing. These things are fabulous. Like I always say to Rick, this is what his grandkids are going to remember. And I have actually written about, because my grandmother used to bring me around on the back of her bike. She's long gone, but I talk about that. Like, I've written about it because it is those things. Now, it doesn't have to be a grandparent. Not everyone has a grandparent, or a, you know, it can be in all different forms, but that's just one of the obvious ways. So anyway.
I also wanted to respond to Matt, what you were saying, like having intergenerational destinations, but actually, like, we talk a lot about all ages, all abilities networks. Like, the network itself is the thing, right? So you're right, it's good to also have this ethos in destinations, informing destinations, but some of the destinations are libraries, right? Grocery stores, which are places that people go to do things at all ages, and ideally with people, right? Like, I remember going to the grocery store with my grandma, you know, like I definitely going to the library, taking my kids to the library, things like that. But I think it's that understanding the network itself as the transportation network as having the potential to be that thing that brings people together in something that is so pleasurable, so vital to health and social cohesion and, you know, daily life. It's just an interesting perspective, like just focusing on that.
As well as the network, it's how you operate the network. You reminded me of my sister who lives in Edinburgh. Her kids' school was part of, it was one of those early school streets things, which are now common. But this is about 10 years ago, where they had a zone around the school where no vehicles were allowed in, including teachers, for, the significant times around the school arrival and departure. What that facilitated was her young children being able to bike to school. But it wasn't my sister who biked with them. It was her father-in-law. It was their grandfather. So my sister's ability to work was being enabled by the fact that her kids could get to school with the grandparent, and they were doing it by bike. So of course it was really fun and and they weren't always coming home. They were going to his place to bake and this and this and that, like just all the things that opened up because the operation of the streets got changed to facilitate arrival and departures from school. That's gone on to be a big program in Edinburgh and other places. But anyway, just the layers of what happens because of how we operate things.
Well, and there are progressions, because we talk about all ages and abilities networks in the US, but really our version here is very transportation based. And you look at all ages and abilities networks in Europe or in South America, there are more benches. There's more space for a variety of vehicles, like vehicles with trailers, vehicles that, are wider so that, they can have two people on them. Like there, you could have passengers, you could have different ages interacting even on the vehicle. We tend to have the bare minimum of a bike lane, and so the cargo bikes tend to be a little bit more challenging. So I think that there's always these enhancements. We're going from school streets to play streets to streets as, outdoor living rooms, like where people belong and have lots of things to do and ways to interact.
Yeah, I think like the first slides I showed were about 3 parks, distinguishing between multi-generational and intergenerational. So I think some of the age-friendly, movement, and they say all ages friendly, still a lot of times just ends up stuff for everybody. It's not really thinking about how do you have people lean in and do stuff together. So Fianwala, how do I say your name again?
Fanula.
Oh,
Fanula.
Oh, that's easy. Fanula gave an example. You went to a museum, and a Please Touch museum in Philly.
Famous museum.
And you paid, and they kicked you out because you didn't have a kid with you, and they probably thought you were a pedophile or something.
I mean, making my case, showing my website. I'm like, I do activities with kids. It was, anyway. I mean, I didn't bad, but it's just sort of shocking situation.
I think we could do a better job thinking about, I guess, the concept of affordances, which is really big in architecture and design, right? Create environments that pull or call for certain kinds of behavior. So libraries, a lot of cultural arts institutions or environmental ed centers, they're kind of like dead. I remember, now Shavers Creek Environmental Center is pretty happening. There's a lot going on, but it used to be these old like panorama little like models that gathering dust. You just look at it. There's nothing to do or engage. So, a lot of libraries and museums are really figuring out how to weave in, young people actually sketching and studying and with microscopes and digging along with their family. So I think multimedia is really key. Including like theater arts. Like I talked about that place in Spain, that village around the castle, they have people dressing up and reenacting some historical stuff. And I had a group of students with me, and we all dressed up. You know, I wanted to be king, but somebody beat me to it. So I was like a peasant. And it was fun. We were like acting, you know, this was so much fun to really be a part of that. And yeah, at any rate, so I'd want to go back there, which deals with rural depopulation. Yeah, sometimes we think, are you around with family strains or environmental stuff or this and that? But that's what we call a movement of intergenerational living. So we have to think about beyond the individual sectors. So arts and culture and recreation, there's a lot that they have to show us about building and design and family strains as well.
I think the Philly Please Touch Museum could be a great Penn outreach project, right? Like challenging the Please Touch Museum to think about whether they are like what kind of facility they want to be. Is it just for kids accompanied by adults of whatever age the particular accompaniment is, or is it for engagement?
You mean like an expose?
Not an
No.
expose, just
That's
no,
my expose.
like encouragement.
Yeah,
Let's
I
do
would-
it together. We're in Pennsylvania and we have
Yeah,
a
I know,
conference
it's a
in July. We
fabulous
hope we
museum.
present.
like a fabulous museum. Like I was I was going there for inspiration and stuff. But anyway, I got tossed.
Right, I've been
Uh,
there.
Yeah,
With
I mean,
kids.
we were members, and
But
we
you
didn't.
had kids with you, I bet.
Yes, I
Yeah,
did.
we were members, and we didn't live in the state.
So what you're talking about is programming, right? So that castle, it's not just the facility, it's programming. And so the question becomes, how do we, as soon as you go and say we should do something, people say, where's the funding? Where's the staff? But it's not just having the space. It's like, well, how am I going to do that? We have so much already on our plate. And so it brings up, and that's kind of across the board. When I show up at early childhood education center, they're like, we don't have time to even think about balance bikes. And we have students that don't, it's just always money and time and effort. So it's programming. How do I get in front of your college classes to talk about what I know about balance bikes? I've tried to get into UH Manoa. I tried to get into UH system with early childhood education, and I get pushed out. They're just like, no. I mean, it's just how do we get this knowledge that we have into the mainstream?
Well, we have techniques, we have ways. Maybe invite me back. I could share some of the guerrilla organizing type activities. Anyway, so it's been wonderful meeting you all. I do have to head out. So we should do it again.
Yeah, and I'm going to send you that article about the muralist. I would love if it went up on your website from the Alaska. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt.
thank you. This has
Thank
been
you.
very stimulating.
Thanks. We'll see you soon. Pat,
Okay.
Sam,
Thanks.
hang
Bye-bye.
in there. You're doing great stuff. All right,
Great,
take care.
thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.